The cornerstone of President Trump's economic agenda faces a major test at the Supreme Court. The justices will hear oral arguments over his sweeping global tariffs and determine whether he has the legal authority to do it. It's the most significant economic case to reach the high court in years, and President Trump clearly is raising the stakes as well, saying that this literally has called this case, quote, life or death for the country. CNN's chief Supreme Court analyst John Biskupic joins me now with much more. What are we expecting today?
Yeah, Kate, good morning. You have not exaggerated this at all. This is the most important Trump case to reach the Supreme Court in his second term. The amount of money at stake, already $90 billion have been collected from his tariffs. Potentially trillions could be collected. So that's a lot of money for the U.S. Treasury, but it's also a lot of pain for consumers who've had to be paying more, a lot of uncertainty for small businesses and for businesses across the board with these tariffs. And that goes to the people who've challenged this. A group of states have challenged these tariffs, as well as small businesses, an educational toy maker, and a wine importer, saying that President Trump exceeded his powers when he imposed these emergency tariffs. The Constitution gives the tariff power to Congress, just as it gives the taxing power to Congress. But President Trump has invoked something called the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. And for anybody who's going to listen today at 10 o'clock, they'll hear the abbreviation IEPA said repeatedly. And that law does give the president emergency economic powers at times, but it does not mention tariffs. It's usually been used for economic sanctions. And lower courts have all ruled against President Trump in this case. Now, he is saying that the law is written broadly enough to encompass the powers that he's used here. But I also have to say that the kind of rhetoric that you're going to hear from President Trump's lawyer today will be almost of the nature that you see in that social media post that you referred to about this being a matter of life and death. And let me just tell you what has emerged in one of the legal filings. 1 year ago, the United States was a dead country, and now because of the trillions of dollars being paid by countries that have badly abused us, America is strong. One last thing, let me tell you who to listen for. Two of Donald Trump's own appointees, Neil Gorsuch, his first appointee, and his third, Amy Coney Barrett, they will probably be pivotal in this case. Listen for how they parse the separation of powers of what the president can do and what Congress can do. And one last thing, Kate, when you hear questions from them, they usually are legitimate. Sometimes the others might be throwing you a bit. So there'll be a lot to listen for when the court begins at 10 a.m. Eastern today, Kate.
So much to listen to. This is an important day at the court, as they all are, but this one, especially when you think of how even the administration would unwind said tariff regime if deemed illegal. Joan, it's great to see you. Thank you so much. We're also talking about a major showdown this morning at the Supreme Court. The justices are set to hear oral arguments over President Trump's sweeping tariffs on America's trading partners all around the world. It is the most high-stakes, important economic case to reach the high court in years, and it's a big test of this president's power and all presidential power. The way President Trump puts the stakes, he calls this case literally life and death for the country. Joining me right now is Michael Moore, the former U.S. Attorney for the Middle District of Georgia. It's good to see you, Michael. Thank you for being here. You heard from the president. I mean, he called it life or death for the country. How significant and how big is the impact of the outcome of this case?
Yeah, well, I'm glad to be with you. This is an important case, but I wouldn't stake that on what the president says. I mean, he has a tendency to speak in sort of exaggeration and hyperbole. I mean, if you think about it, everything that happens is an emergency, and anybody who disagrees with him is a criminal. So I think he's sort of stretching there. But it's a big case because the Supreme Court's going to not just have to be thinking about this president, but the next president coming. And so how much is the court willing to expand or give executive authority to a president, and that's the test. It's not simply about this case, though. Frankly, this is going to be the line of we'll see whether or not the conservative justices actually want to stand by the language in the Constitution, or whether or not they're going to try to find a loophole to sort of support their side of the team.
I was reading that you note that something to look out for today and focus on today during oral arguments is to listen for how a tariff is defined. Explain why. Talk to me more about that.
Right. So the case really is just about can a president go out under some emergency power and say, I'm going to now regulate trade by imposing these tariffs. And so the other side is saying, look, wait a minute, a tariff is actually a tax because the American citizens end up absorbing that cost. You're basically taxing us. You're not putting a penalty on the producing country or the shipping country. You're actually taxing me by raising the price of goods, and everybody's seeing that in every store they go in throughout the country. And so the question will be whether or not the tariff will be seen as a tax or not. And this is not a novel point. If you think about it and remember that John Roberts, when he was writing the opinion dealing with the Affordable Care Act, when he was making the point that even the penalty, they called it, he considered that to be a tax because that's how he was able to sustain the Affordable Care Act. So the definition of tariff, the definition of regulate under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act that the president is using, those are going to be definitions that I think you'll see some fighting on both sides of the bench as the lawyers make their arguments to the court today.
You noted the conservative majority on the court and how they would thread the needle. I mean, how do past rulings inform what direction they could be headed, or what does a thread the needle look like here?
Well, when we've talked about conservative justices, typically they've held themselves out as being textualists. They read the Constitution. They say that the framers intended to have limited government and checks and balances and those kind of things. But lately you've seen those justices sort of set the idea of checks and balances by co-equal branches of government aside and give great deference to the executive. And so the question will be whether or not they stand by that view of the Constitution or whether or not they now look for a wording in a congressional statute. The wording they'll be deciding is regulate, because the only way that Trump is able to even move these tariffs forward is to say, I have powers under a congressional statute that says I can regulate trade in the case of some emergency. Well, the Constitution says, that only Congress can tax. And so if they decide, in fact, that they're going to give more deference to a term called regulate than they are to the terms in the Constitution itself and what those meant at the time and what the subsequent legislation has done to define those powers, that's going to be a different bridge for them. They typically like to come down and say, look, we just like the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment is sacred. Nobody can do anything to it because it says this, even no matter what people argue about it. Well, now they want to twist a little bit and say, well, under the Constitution, the power to tax may mean something a little different than we think it meant after all. So this will be a needle they'll have to thread. They'll have to come back on some things that they've written in the past, some decisions that they've talked about to try to make this opinion make sense, even though it may be divergent from what they've articulated in past opinions.
It's going to be very interesting. And today begins those oral arguments. It's good to see you, Michael. Thank you very much.
Been fighting so long and so hard that they don't know what the they're doing.